The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 21st chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
It says 13.
The 13th chapter, verse 21. That's what I really meant to say.
31?
It's in the book, okay? Let's see if I got it right. Don't stare at the screen for too long, though. It's a little bit wobbly this morning. I was getting seasick. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Did I get that right? Sometimes I get the numbers confused. I knew I was in the right spot, kind of. Well, for the readings this morning, as I read through them, as I typically do early in the week, just to start thinking about what I'm going to say on Sunday, the verse that stood out, or the part of these readings that stood out to me was, you probably felt the same way, it was the Gospel of John in the last part of what that reading was. Jesus' commandment to his disciples, that you should love one another. Just as I have loved you, so too you should love one another. By this people will know that you're my disciples. Because who doesn't want to talk about love? Well, I don't. No, I'm just kidding. It's a super powerful statement, and there's a lot that can be read into it. This takes place in John's Gospel in a transition point. The first 12 chapters of John's Gospel are the travel narrative, and then from chapter 13 to chapter 20 is, well, some people refer to it as the glory chapters, and it's Jesus' time in Jerusalem. And so this is sort of toward the end of chapter 13, and this is after the Last Supper, when John explains and narrates the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And then toward the end of that, he reveals that he's going to be betrayed by somebody. And they're all wondering, who is it? Who's going to betray Jesus? It's not me. It's got to be Judas. They didn't know that. But Jesus says, well, whoever I together dip bread into this, whatever they were dipping it, it's like Olive Garden, a little oil and vinegar, and I don't know. Did they do that at Olive Garden? No. If I was Judas, I wouldn't be reaching for a piece of bread with Jesus at that point, would you? Anyways. So, as soon as he does that, Judas gets up and leaves. And Jesus says, now that my betrayer is gone. And they finish the supper, and as they're exiting the upper room and heading out into Jerusalem at the beginning of that week, what we call Holy Week, this is when Jesus gives them this new commandment. But interestingly, it starts first with this past tense. God is going to be glorified in him, and God will be glorified through him and because of him, and that sort of confusing language that doesn't make as much sense to us in English as it perhaps did to people in Greek. But he speaks as if it's already taken place. Jesus' glory is going to take place on the cross. That's how we understand the glory of God to be revealed most powerfully, is in Jesus' sacrifice. But clearly it's not happened yet. But Jesus often does do that. He speaks in the past tense about things that haven't happened yet. And part of that, most scholars believe, and I tend to agree with them, is it's because if God has ordained it, then it's going to happen. Nothing is going to get in the way to stop what is going to take place. And perhaps that betrayal is what really set into motion the things that were about to take place with Judas doing what Judas did. But the glory of God was going to be revealed, and nothing was going to stop it, despite Peter's attempts to stop it and some of the other disciples' attempts to stop it. And that's a kind of an interesting thing to think about things in that way. Jesus is, in some ways, revealing himself again as the divine God and speaking with that kind of certainty. But as he goes through that process and speaks about his glory, referring to them again as little children, and then telling them he's going someplace that they can't follow, which would have been confusing to them. And that's not part of my sermon, but when he does get to the commandment, to love one another as I have loved you, I get the sense that perhaps that was missing in them. That there was something amongst them that wasn't perfect, that wasn't loving, that wasn't sacrificial like Jesus' love was. And he was giving them this commandment because if they were already doing that, he wouldn't need to have said anything to them. But he's also revealing in that, with the part where he says, where I'm going, you can't come, giving them some instructions for what is going to happen when he is gone. They wouldn't have understood it at all at the time, but would have come to understand it later. And you know, Jesus left. And what he left behind to reveal the glory of God and to reveal his glory was people like us. We were the ones to be the witnesses of it, if you will, the disciples. The stories were written down. The Gospels hadn't been written yet, but they would be. And the stories would be told and would still be told a couple thousand years later. But if there's no meat on those bones, they're just stories. And remarkably, miraculously, over the last 2,000 years, that message has been continued to be spread throughout the world, not just by the words that were written, but by the deeds of human beings like us. And that's done through love. We get it right sometimes, but for the most part, we don't. And that's been true since the beginning. When it's said in the book of Revelation, when we're in this heavenly end of the world scene where Jesus says, I'm making all things new, or I'm doing a new thing, it's easy to interpret that or read that as saying that somehow God didn't have things figured out until that point and was like, you know what I think I'll do now? I'll create a new heaven and a new earth. I hadn't thought of that before, but it seems like a good idea now. That's probably not the way that God was thinking about this. This was already going to take place, and God had figured that out long before human beings ever existed. God is beyond time, knows everything. He's omniscient, omnipresent, and all-powerful and all-knowing. Nothing is a surprise, but it's certainly something new for us. New or different for us. Unexpected is maybe a way that I would put it. That God's doing things that are unexpected. But again, it's unexpected from our perspective. And you get that sense also with the passage from the book of Acts. When Peter's having this dream, this large sheet comes down, and it's full of all kinds of different creatures, and he's told to kill and eat. And Peter, of course, being a good Jew, says, I've never had anything profane enter my mouth. Really, Peter? Okay. But he's doing something unexpected and new. God is. Peter has to explain that to the rest of the Jews in Jerusalem as they call him to account for him hanging out with Gentiles. That's just not something you would have done. I mean, hanging out and having dinner with a bunch of people like us? No. No. There's just all kinds of reasons why you would never do that. But that's a human creation. That's a human endeavor. That's a human dynamic, not a dynamic that God ever had in place to separate people one from another. It's never been that way. But our problem is we never quite get it. That we want to create God in our image. We want to create religion as we think it should be best done. We want to use our knowledge and our understanding and even our faith to exclude and judge people because that's a better way for us to do it. And throughout the history of humankind, God's been saying, no, you guys, you need to catch up here. Come on down, kids. Hey, how are you? And God has been extraordinarily patient with us throughout the course of human history, and interacting with us and revealing himself to us, and in the hopes that at some point, even in the Old Testament, that they would be witnesses to who God is in this world and his presence in the world, in spite of their not always getting it right. I can't help but to think about what we've been studying in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and a conversation that I've had with a friend of mine over the last couple of weeks about their desire for a king, their desire to have a king like all the rest of the kings of this world. And when they go to Samuel, the people of Israel, and say, we want a king like everybody else has. Really? Really? Like, God has been with you this whole time, and he's been fighting for you and providing for you. You've had food, you've had water, you've had everything. As long as you've been like with the program, everything has been absolutely perfect. But that's still not good enough for you. You really want a king? And then God goes on to explain through the prophet, if you have a king, it's not going to go well for you. It's really, don't choose a human king. I'm telling you, you don't want to do that. And their response is, we want a king, just like everybody else has. All right. And so for the next, 10 or 15 chapters in 1 Samuel, and the next 24 chapters in 2 Samuel, it's revealed over and 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 over again why that was a bad decision. But yet through all of it, God remains steadfast in his love for his people, and his patience and his tolerance for his people, because of this extraordinary love that he has for them, in spite of their craziness and their insanity. And he never gives up, and he never gave up, and he still hasn't given up, and he will never, ever give up on us. And when Jesus came and did the things that he did so as an example to us of the better way for us to live our lives and to express the faith that we have. You don't have to do any of those things. And loving each other as I love you, I don't know if he's talking about necessarily just the disciples or if he's talking about other people, but trust me when I tell you, you don't get to exclude other people from being loved because they're not Christians, because he also said, love your enemies. He also said, love others as you love yourself. He's covered the whole spectrum of what love can and should look like. And in spite of our brokenness and how we live our lives, that's a question that still confuses and befuddles me at times. What is it like to love other people so that others can somehow know, I guess, who I am as a person and what I believe, but more so that they can understand and come to know that there is a God that loves them like I know he loves me. And it's really hard because the way we understand love is different and unique. And the object of who it is that we love is really different and unique. It's very easy for me to love my son. It's very easy for me to love my wife. It's very easy for me to love all of you. It's not so easy to love people that drive like idiots. I hate those people. Still. There's a lot of people that are hard to love. And that's where the confusion comes in of what does it look like to love those people. And Jesus wasn't super specific in that. And I think there's a reason for that. Because if it was prescribed to us of what love looks like, to feed people or to give them money or to give them shelter, he did talk about those things. But there was so much more to it than that. The example he left us was not just in words, but in actions of what love looks like, of what the kind of love that he was describing looks like. And that was what he did on the cross. And that's what he did when he washed the feet of his disciples. And that's what he did when he did all of the things that he did that were done sacrificially and selflessly for the sake of other people. Because the world that we live in and the things that are important to us are important to us because they're about us. And we want to do the things and have the things and see the things that we want because we want them. Want is a strong, strong urge in us. And so what this unexpected thing is, especially today in the world that we live in here in Southern California, is to not go after all of the stuff, but to live a sacrificial life. To live a life where we don't hang on to and hold on to everything that we can possibly get our hands on because that's going to make our lives better. Has that ever worked for anybody? No, it doesn't. It doesn't work for anybody. It's never worked for anybody. The richest people suffer from the same problems as the poorest people. The people that have the most, the perfect lives, there's a lot of imperfection in there. That stuff doesn't matter. And so those instructions that Jesus gave us to live sacrificially is a different way, is an unexpected way for us to live our lives. And to do that, to love others, to love one another as he loved us, he's saying you have to love sacrificially. You have to love selflessly. You have to give of yourself and consider whoever it is and whatever it is that you're given an opportunity to love. And say to yourself, is what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, is that love? Is that being done in a loving way? Is that being done for the benefit of the other person and not for my benefit? Not because I receive anything from it. That's the sacrificial love. It's not about what do I get in return for what I have done. It's what can I give in this situation, to this person, or to this situation that is going to express and witness to the profound and unimaginable love that God has and has always had and will always have for the people of this world. And that's what we're called to do. I'm going to give you a pass because you're not going to get it right all the time. But if we only think in terms of what the norms are in our world and how other people do it, or what the common beliefs and perceptions are, we're never going to get it right. Because that's when Jesus steps in. That's when God steps in and says, no. Those things or those people or whatever it is that you think is profane, it is not. I have fixed all of that by what I did on the cross. It's all been taken care of. And that's where we stumble. We fall into those patterns of, well, this is what everybody thinks about whoever. We need to ask ourselves, is that loving? Is that loving like God loved us? Because, as I've said a number of times, the truth is, we're no different. We're no different in regard to our sin or the way that we live our lives in the eyes of God. We are all broken. We all miss the mark. But thanks be to God, he has fixed us through his Son, Jesus Christ, which gives us the opportunity to share that with other people. That's what loving one another